If you're familiar with competitive Pokemon, then you know how good Pursuit is. The foundation of competitive Pokemon is switching. If you don't want to take that Earthquake, then you just switch out of it. But Pursuit is the one exception. It says, look, if you want to switch out of this move, then you have to take double damage. So it's an integral part of every generation it's in, Gens 2 through 7. And a lot of people think, oh yeah, Pursuit, that's pretty neat. But they also kind of underestimate it. Not underestimate, how good Pursuit trapping certain Pokemon can be, but more underestimate the reach that Pursuit can have. It's naturally a weak move, 40 base power, and it's not very strong if you don't have Stab on it, and it's still not really that strong in general, so you really have to pick a specific target, and those targets are generally limited to Pokemon weak to Dark, so Ghost and Psychic types. So you might think, yeah, it's good for trapping those, but beyond that, not one of the best moves, on par with something like Stealth Rock or U-Turn or Knockoff. So in this video, I would like to demonstrate just how good Pursuit can be even against non-conventional targets, against Pokemon that aren't weak to Dark. So you might think, okay, yeah, there's some exceptions, like in Ores, Hoopa Unbound was not weak to Dark, but it was really frail, so it used a lot of Dark and Psychic moves, so that made it a prime target. But I'm not talking just physically frail Pokemon that are open invitations to Pursuit users, Tyranitar, of course, being their patron saint. I'm talking like everything can get pursuited. So what we're going to do is first we're going to look at a couple examples of some unconventional pursuiting. And once we've done that, to give you an idea of how this can be applied, then we will go through each generation with Pursuit and examine the Pursuit users and what they aim to trap. So, quick disclaimer, this is far from the only... These games I'm going to show you, there's 4 of them, they're far from the only applications of unconventional pursuits out there. I mean, over the last years, I've seen crazy stuff. I've seen Mega Heracrosses get pursuited, Mega Diancies, over and over and over again. So if you delve into the replays of the past several years of high-level tournaments, which I encourage you to do if you're interested in getting better, or just interested in watching good games, you will come across this kind of thing a lot. It's a shame that they removed Pursuit from Gen 8, but and that's something we have to live with. Anyway, so here we go. This is first. Actually, we're not going to start with the battle we're going to watch ourselves. Instead, I want to refer you to a video made by McMegan. McMegan has recently started uploading. He is one of the best players of all time. You could make a great argument for him being the best. For a long time, he was considered the unequivocal best, and as far as I'm concerned, then you could still do so today. He's achieved an incredible amount, and he started uploading, so you should go check him out. He's also got a great Belgian accent, so that'll probably put him over the top for some of you. Anyway, he made this video about this is also my personal favorite play ever. I won't spoil what it is exactly, although I'm sure you can probably guess from the thumbnail and the subject of this video. But I won't spoil the details just yet, because they get even better when you actually go into it. Anyway, point being that this Ruer versus Blue play with the T-Tar and the Mienshao was really the front runner of this style of unconventional pursuiting that had kind of took over the landscape over the last several years. People were like, wow, I can Pursuit everything. Instead of just hitting a switch for little damage, then I can Pursuit and make sure I get some more relevant damage. And before this play was made, in the summer of 2012, you basically never saw this. I mean, even for years after, it took a while. I mean, the next example, which we're going to see, that replay of CBB, that was almost, call it a year and a half, between a year and a half and 2 years later. So, and then it took off more after that. But this was the first time it happened on such an important match. So rather than just I strongly urge you to check out this video and McMegan's channel in general. He does a great job explaining it. So this was the front runner of this style of, I'm going to, if it's an opposing Pokemon, I'll Pursuit it. So, anyway, this was the front runner. I'll let McMegan explain that. Now we move on to CBB. So, here we see, this was early XY. Genesect, I think, had just been banned, something like that, but Mega Lucario was still running around, which is pretty nuts. So, CBB goes for a knockoff, gives it justified boosts, pre-Mega, yikes. Just straight up kills Thundurus with close combat because of adaptability and +1. So now he goes to his Scarf Garchomp, which he thinks is going to threaten it out. So he's like, alright, well, I'll get up rocks with my Scarf Chomp as he switches out. But no, he just goes for another CC. So now he goes to Bisharp, and I'm sure you all know what's coming. But, so this is an example because, again, prior to this, the only precedent for such a play was that Ruhr game, so this was not exactly common. So it boils down to, look, if I let this Lucario switch out, then it'll come back in and destroy me later. But you can outplay it. The whole point is, if Lucario switches out, I can still maybe outplay because Charizard Y is a huge threat and things like that. But if you just let it kill the Bisharp, then you guarantee you lose to it on the spot. So, what the move that CBB makes here is pursuing the Lucario as it switches out, and it goes down. So, it was a direct descendant of the Ruhr versus Blue play. Hopefully you've paused this video and gone to watch the McMegan one by now, but come back to this, please. Anyway. Regardless of the order in which you choose to watch, both of these videos are important for the prominence and power of Pursuit. Anyway, so yeah, that's the gist, pursuing big threats like that. But, it's not always just life and death, because the two examples we've seen so far are, matters of, I get swept on the spot if I don't Pursuit this thing. He could play, in this scenario, he could play it safe and Sucker Punch to delay the Lucario, but, the Ruhr versus Blue game was pretty much, do or die. Of course, the Pursuit was very much an or die play as well if it went wrong, but, he had another option at least. Anyway, point being, so this kind of risky pursuing or riskier pursuing is not always so risky. It's not always life or death. So there are other great examples. So in this one, then this is a Smogon Tour game between Blunder and X-Ray during Oris, and Blunder's using an old Jambad team. It has a great setup because one of the few things that stops Superior is P-Tran. So, you subseed it with your SERP, and then you go to... Pursuit got such a big buff in Gen 6, because you get to see stuff like this, where Steel no longer resists Dark. And, so far we've talked about how even Resists can be pursued, which is very much true. And, if Resists can be pursued, then neutral Pokemon can also very much be pursued. And not just the frail ones, either. Like the Hoopa Unbound example. So, it's very possible to, how do I phrase this? Put the clamps on as a huge amount of Pokemon that you normally wouldn't think, yeah, this is Pursuit Week. You could kind of compare it to Dugtrio in the sense that you think, oh yeah, this insert bulky Pokemon, like let's say Swampert or Suicune in DPP, you'd think, oh yeah, they're not vulnerable to Dugtrio, and then their offensive variants are hanging around half health, and Doug just comes in and picks them off, even though they're not technically Doug weak. So, Pursuit is similar in this sense. So anyway, he has a great setup here. He's got to avoid a Lava Plume burn, but, with the Leech Seed into the Ban T-Tar, then this Heatran is toast. That's funny. Anyway, so that was a great setup, great team for its time. And yeah, the point being that this is, so now we see that neutral Pokemon can be pursued easily as well. Here's another great example. This one's from Ultra Sun and Moon. ABR was also a big guy in popularizing the Pursuit Everything craze. CVB, I think, was the first guy who was really, like, encouraging this pursuit everything kind of mentality. But ABR's Weavile stall was also a huge part of popularizing that during Oris, and then he carried it over into Sun and Moon. So here we see a prime example. So we see a Clef come in, and then a double switch to Lando. So this Lando is hugely threatening, and because it Swords Dances, and Tangrowth doesn't want to die. So now Diancie gets sacked on the Z move, and TDK goes for sub, and now Diancie gets sacked, and Weavile comes in, and you already know what's happening because Lando doesn't want to stay in. And I mean, look, it doesn't even have to KO, just like in the Heatran scenario. Then just putting it down to that low is so helpful. And here's an even more unconventional one. He pursues the Celesteela. That was not as necessary. It's just he doesn't want to give the Lando a free double switch because, look, if TDK double switches back to Lando on the Heatran switch, then he will be able to claim a KO on ABR. Whereas if ABR just pursues the Steela, it's not about pursuing the Steela as much as nailing Lando when it comes back in and trapping it again. So you really get a lot of interesting use out of Pursuit. It's such an interesting move to have. So, and instead Metacham comes in, and now it's going to claim a KO itself. But if that Lando thing had worked out, then that would have been beautiful. And, I'm fairly sure TDK was actually aware of that, which is why he went to Metacham instead, because at least that grabs a KO. So, nicely done on his end, on both players' ends, really. So, now Weavile comes in, and Metacham's at low, so, again, pursuited. So, and I think so now he does it again. So he makes a risky move going to Weavile on the non-Z move, and gets the trap off. Of course, if the Z move popped off, then Tangrowth might have been able to beat it, but it was still very likely that TDK won at that point. So it was a great move to keep himself alive. Anyway, so now the final example of how Pursuit can be used for everything. This is my favorite example. So this was from the same SPL that ABR versus TDK was in. This was a semis tiebreak, whereas this game, the Weavile one, was the finals. And this one is crazy because this is a UU. Yeah, Gliscor and UU. That was something. Anyway, so Spore and now the Toxic Orb. So now here we see a Mega Aerodactyl, the king of UU, coming in and pursuing Gliscor. I mean, look, this isn't really even relevant chip. See, like 72% on a Poison Heal Roost Pokemon, that's not a big deal. But it's much better than just Stone Edging into Slowbro and accomplishing basically nothing. Now you can force Roost from the Gliscor, especially because it's going to be at 60 when coming into Rocks next time, and you can pressure it more that way. This way you accomplish more than just getting walled. So, and you can potentially chain pursuits on him over and over again, on the Gliscor over and over, and you might even be able to threaten it out that way because it doesn't want to stay in for fear of just getting Ice Fanged into oblivion. So this is an example of how even when the pursuit doesn't actually do that much damage, it can still be really, really nice to have. So, but that's just the beginning for this game. So now Slowbro comes in, we get Rocks, Stealth Rock, Hydreigon, Amoonguss, Dark Pulse, Gliscor, and now Amoonguss just goes for the Giga Drain, and Gliscor's got a Roost here thanks to that pursuit earlier. It can't actually pressure, so you get the super effective Giga Drain on it, and eventually knock off. It's gonna Roost eventually. Now Arrow comes back in, and Roost and pursuit again because it's better than getting walled, and TDK's not staying in. So now here comes Empoleon. Now we're still just getting started. Now TDK makes an aggressive move into his own Arrow, and this Empoleon is sleeping with one turn, so he's not going to want to stand and get slammed. So now the Empoleon gets chipped, and that's relevant damage. That was a clean 38%. So that's definitely really helpful for later on. And now here comes Crocodile, another Pokemon with Pursuit. So the thing is that it can definitely scare out Arrow with the threat of Stone Edge and Pursuit it again. And Of course, here is a drawback of Pursuit. You can't just spam it all the time. Otherwise, you have scenarios like what happens here. So, TDK predicts the Pursuit nicely and stays in and Ice Fangs the Crook. And gets a freeze, although it was likely switching out anyway. But this makes it easier for him to make this next move, which is to then Pursuit the Crocodile. But Christo is not deterred because he switches to his Scizor. Arrow doesn't want to stay in, and now Arrow gets pursued again. So Christo has 3 pursuits on his team: Crook, Mega Arrow, Scizor. So that's a way to leave chip on your opponent guaranteed. Because one of the worst things in getting walled is when you try to launch a strong attack and your opponent just switches out and absorb it easily. But with Pursuit, you don't have that. This way you can create holes in teams forcibly and be like, well, you can't switch out of this. And even in unconventional places. So we've had how many Pursuits this game so far? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So yeah, over and over. And later in the game, then the Arrow pursues Gliscor twice more, but Gliscor winds up outlasting it because there's one because Gliscor is unbeatable. So see there it happens again and gets it down pretty low, but Gliscor comes back, and yeah. So then the Calm Mind work, etc. Anyway, so now that we've seen the examples of Pursuit, of how Pursuit can be applied in various scenarios, even in places where you wouldn't expect it, I encourage you to go out and further check out some Pursuit. You'll have to do some digging, because these are just the games that instantly came to my head, but if you're paying attention, even in games where Pursuit doesn't get used, if you're trying to improve and figure out how you can implement Pursuit into your own game. Well, we're about to go over the Pursuit Pokemon and how they can be applied, so that'll help. But I was going to say, go into those replays of those high-level tournament games you're already watching and see where Pursuit could be applied in less conventional spots. Like, if he pursues the Ghost type, he can pull off Rapid Spin successfully, so he should do that. That's the obvious answer, but see if you can figure out something less conventional. Yeah, I will give some examples now, of course. So we're starting with Pursuit in Gen 2, where it originated. So let me fix the dimensions a little bit. I actually did not know Rhydon got Pursuit until now in Gen 2. Not that you would ever use it, because, no stab and, pitiful special attack stat. So, but the main Pursuit users in OU are Tyranitar, and then Umbreon, and finally Hound Doom, even though it is BL. So, let me make sure my dimensions are good. Okay, so first of all, what are the targets for Pursuit? Well, the primary targets for T-Tar are ghosts. So, Gengar and Misdreavus in GSC. That's the target for every Pursuiter. They help your Rapid Spin get pulled off, your Fortress, sometimes your Cloyster. Golem doesn't need as much help. But yeah, the spin, Starmie, helping that spin against those ghosts is nice. And so it helps against, alright, slow down. It helps against Gengar and Missy, and also is another nice target in Exeggutor. Now, it's not, the maxed bulk of the maxed EVs in GSC, as you can see here, it means that you don't instantly, drop things. And, there's no choice band or anything to power it up. So, and thanks to the physical special split, then in Gens 2 and 3, then Pursuit is a special attack. So, you're not getting the full brunt of it. But it's still effective. You just have to use it more aggressively, because you're not just going to be able to throw T-Tar into everything and have it kill stuff. So, like, for example, you're going to want a second move to complement that Pursuit. And I believe that Pursuit T-Tar needs either Crunch or Earthquake. So Crunch is the obvious one. Well, because realistically you're going to want to fit Roar and then a last move. So the last move is up for grabs, but first of all, let me start with the Crunch one. The Crunch one sticks it more to Starmie if weakened. Now Starmie 2 KOs you with Surf, so you're going to want to try to trap Starmie when it's poisoned. And already at low health, so you can actually finish it off with Crunch. The damage calculator is your friend. And if you want to, I know I don't think they have Pursuit on Switch on the Calc. No, they don't. So if you want to calc Pursuit damage, just do Crunch, because that is what it is. So as you can see here, Crunch on Starmie is not doing a ton, so you're going to want to weaken it first, usually with Cloyster's Toxic, which is an easy grab, so that'll help a lot. And then you can Crunch and finish it off. But the main reason you want to Crunch is to finish off Misdreavus and Gengar, because otherwise those guys will potentially be able to stay in and beat you one-on-one with their various tricks. And it's especially relevant against Exeggutor. So otherwise, Giga Drain sets are just going to stay in and hammer away at you. Technically, you don't need Crunch for Eggy. You could run this old set, which is Pursuit, Fire Blast, Roar, Rock Slide, which is also really nice. And it still generally gets the job done against Gengar and Missy, but you might want to consider, if you something else to really force the issue. Crunch and Earthquake also have great coverage against Golem, which is really relevant right now. You don't see much of this set post Golem Surge, so. And Fire Blast, of course, has the accuracy and PP thing. So Crunch is generally the safer option. Another target that T-Tar can potentially trap is Jinx, which is really helpful. You have to be careful because you don't want to switch it into Ice Beams with spikes all day, and you're not going to be KOing it on the switch. But it definitely threatens Jinx out, and you can trap it for a good chunk. So, but that's more of a side bonus as opposed to a main draw of T-Tar. The main thing is the ghosts. And sometimes the other stuff, as bonuses. So Crunch helps there. Now, the other move I mentioned is Earthquake. So I've always been a huge fan of Pursuit, EQ, Roar, Rock Slide, T-Tar. And the reason is Earthquake actually, you'll still get the job done against Missy. If the non-Crunch variants do fine against Missy, generally, then you'll still do fine with this one. I mean, you're going to have to be more careful around, rest stuff. So, again, I would recommend playing with a little more finesse, trying to weaken it first before, or, force it to rest or something before trying to trap it. You're not going to be able to brute force your way through it without Crunch. But it's still definitely doable. However, Earthquake is actually better than Crunch against Gengar because it hits it harder, thanks to T-Tar's higher attack and Gengar's lower defense. The main thing Earthquake does is it lets you threaten Raikou, and this is the unconventional Pursuit thing. I should also mention that Exeggutor, you don't trap with this at all, but that's less of a problem for a lot of teams. Exeggutor is more of a side bonus rather than a necessity. So, if you're running something like an EQ Machamp that's completely walled by Egg, then I would definitely consider running Crunch, or at least Fire Blast on it. But you can definitely the whole idea with EQ T-Tar, sorry, I'm trying to say a million things at once. The idea with EQ T-Tar, besides EQ being good for would-be switches like Nidoking and Golem and Rhydon and other T-Tar even, and the idea is basically you now threaten Raikou, whereas rest Raikou, especially Rest Talk Raikou, kind of destroys non-EQ, non-cursed T-Tar, and that's a lot of them, because it's hard to fit all the moves you want. Like the Crunch set I mentioned, if you put Crunch over EQ, and the last move can be a lot of things. Fire move is most common. You can even try stuff like Thunderbolt. But, if you run the Crunch set, then, even Rock Slide is not breaking through Raikou. I mean, you take a look at this calc here. You should always calc. Always calc. It helps you know how much damage is being done rather than estimate. I have a video dedicated to it. Anyway, so here you see this Rock Slide Raikou, which is an 84% to 3 KO after spikes and lefties, meaning if the Raikou is switching into you, but if it rests up. I mean, I'm not saying you can't generate pressure with it, but Raikou will generally get the better of you. Now with Earthquake, you straight up threaten it. You do a ton. I mean, you're not OHKOing, because this is GSC, but, that's a lot of damage. Raikou, especially with spikes. So the idea here is that with EQ, T-Tar becomes a Raikou trapper, and this helps your special attackers, like your Zapdos and your Gengar, a lot. It's a really, really nice tool to have. So this is an example of unconventional pursuiting in GSC. And another one is if you have a fire move on your T-Tar, so for example, if you're running this set, then what you can do is use this to scare out Fortress and Skarmory. This is really quiet. I'm going to switch over to the next thing. If you're wondering what this is from my background music playlist on my channel. That's an ad. But I'm not interested in the newspaper, so we're going to go on. Anyway, so Fortress is really nice because if you're embroiled in a spikes war, trying to fight off rapid spins and trying to keep off their spikes, then you can get Fortress for nice little chip. I mean, look, this is not a lot of damage. This Pursuit as it stays, it's not going to stay in, so you want to calc the crunch. I should have calced the crunch on Raikou too. I'll do that after this. But I mean, this 17 to 20% doesn't seem like a lot, but with spikes up, it is, especially if you manage to do it repeatedly. Let me calc the crunch on. Yeah, I mean, look, this crunch on Raikou is not a lot, but with spikes, that's pretty nasty. I mean, if you show Earthquake, it's not going to want to stay in on you. Now, look, I don't recommend throwing T-Tar into Thunder. I mean, as you can see here, it still does a lot. But, with some good maneuvering, you don't want to come into the Thunder, but once you're in, then you can scare it out, you can Pursuit it. And, so with Fire Blast or Flamethrower, then you can chip Fortress. Now, Skarmory is a little more resilient to chip because it does not get hit by spikes, unlike these every other target. But the thing about Skarm is that, again, if it doesn't have Toxic, you can repeatedly threaten it, and because it doesn't want to take a single Fire Blast. So let me put Fire Blast in that calc, or even Flamethrower, and every little bit of chip counts. I mean, this 15 to 19 effective, or 16 to 19 effectively, that can make a huge difference when Skarm is trying to fend off Machamp or Kerslax. So yeah, it can go a long way, especially if you do it repeatedly, which T-Tar gets a lot of opportunities to do, given the pace that the teams with Fortress and Skarmory generally operate at. So, those are the big ones. I mean, there are lots of other applications, potentially, depending on the state of the game you're in. I mean, like you can Pursuit Steelix and more, but we're going to stick with this for now, because this video is already going to be long, and we have a lot more to get to. So, anything else I want to mention? Oh, yes, Roar. Roar on Pursuit T-Tar is an underrated... It's not underrated in so far as pretty much every Pursuit Tar is also going to have Roar, but it's underutilized as an offensive weapon, because look, if you roar in that Gengar or that Fortress, then you force in your Pursuit target before they're ready to switch into you, and that's huge. That makes such a difference, because like, when you switch T-Tar into Gengar, then you have to deal with spikes and potentially getting double switched on, and potentially Dynamic Punch, and even if it doesn't have Dynamic Punch, just getting wailed away on with attacks and not being able to KO it, even if it switches out and blah, blah, blah. But if you force that target in with Roar unexpectedly, then suddenly they're on the back foot and you are in that one-on-one cleanly and in a perfect position. So this is really applicable to Gen 3 as well, actually. So that saves me some time mentioning that later. But yeah, it's a great tool. Make use of it. Yeah, T-Tar can do it all. He's less of a Wrecking Ball in Gen 2. He can be with the Curse set, but most of the time he's just this pursuing Swiss Army knife. Now, Umbreon. So, Umbreon is not a great pursuiter because of its power. It's, pretty weak. But what Umbreon provides is a great defensive utility. So, that special attack stat is pretty meager, but what it does is, wall stuff really nicely, and that lets it pursue stuff repeatedly throughout the game. So if you get in on Exeggutor, you can charm it so that its explosion doesn't kill, and you can chip it with Pursuit. You're a lot more resilient to Gengar. You're not threatened by Dynamic Punch nearly as much. And Ms. Dravis is... Now, the thing is, you definitely need help, because otherwise you are going to get stalled out by things like Rest Ms. Dravis and Recover Starmie. So you will need some support in that category, because you're not going to be breaking through them with Umbreon's power. But, the Starmie thing is pretty easy, because just like Cloyster would Toxic Starmie, and then you would try to weaken it with switches and forced Rapid Spins before trying to crunch it down with Tar, then with Umbreon, you just Toxic it and immediately switch to Umbreon. And you get a good, nice trap on it because of the toxic damage, and the toxic damage racks up alongside the poison. Did I say Crunch, or basically Pursuit on Switch plus the Poison will help you eventually run Starmie out of Recover PP, and therefore in the long game you'll be fine. And Umbreon fits on teams that play the long game. So that's generally what you try to do. And you'll need some support against Missy for sure. But, with Toxics and forcing rests and, Chip from other Pokemon and, dragging it in with Roars from... I generally would not recommend using, two of these Pokemon on the same team. They don't do enough to justify that. But, if you roar it in with something like Roar Raikou, then, you can help Umbreon a lot in that department. So, this is the more walling approach. Now, you're not going to get as much unconventional pursuit here. I mean, the most you might do is, let's say, charm a Snorlax and then pursuit it for, nothing as it switches out. But... those teams are generally concerned with stalling a Snorlax more than chipping it, so it doesn't really make much of a difference. The one unconventional bit of chip I will give Umbreon, besides maybe a Rhydon or something, is mostly Nidoking, because Umbreon is one of the few Pokemon that really counters Nidoking. And but if you give Nidoking a lot of opportunities throughout a battle, then you will eventually potentially find yourself crumbling to its pressure, especially alongside Spikes. So with Pursuit, these little dinky Pursuits plus Spikes, then you put a timer on Nidoking, and that really, really helps. So you're not going entirely defensive. I mean, it's not a lot, but a little goes a long way, especially because Pursuit plus Spikes, on the Switch also means that, now Nidoking is not able to switch into your Raikou's Hidden Power Ice, because it'll get 2 KO'd. So... it's that kind of thing. Again, a little goes a long way, and it really is a little in this case, but don't underestimate how much of a difference that can make. Of course, you also have to remember that you cannot trap something with Pursuit if you're calling it with Sleep Talk. So, let's say Jinx or Nidoking or Exeggutor uses Sleep Powder, and then they switch, and you use Sleep Talk and you call Pursuit, you're going to hit the incoming Pokemon with Pursuit. So, that's something to keep in mind, but yeah. Umbreon is also a great Jinx answer. I mean, you got to watch out for Freeze, but so does literally everything besides of Articuno. So, anyway, it's a great answer to these tricky guys: the Eggy, the Gengar, Jinx, and this is Misdreavus with some help, and even Nidoking. So, and of course, its defensive utility of handling things like Nidoking and Curslax is really valuable. And of course, the free Starmie, or not the free particularly, because it's not like you're threatening to KO it, but being able to switch into Starmie so easily and pursuit it, when it's toxic, of course, is really, really great. Finally, Hound Doom. Hound Doom is the most specialized pursuiter in GSC because it has very little in the way of defensive utility. T-Tar's got this great HP, this great defense, good special defense, and normal resistance. Umbreon has huge bulk, and Hound Doom doesn't really have much in that department. It's very frail, but what it does have is a resistance to ice, so it's basically a perfect Jinx answer, and it's also offensively threatening in its own right because it's fast. It's as fast as Jinx, which outspeeds a good chunk of the OU metagame. And it's got Stab Fire Blast off a really nice special attack stat. So you're really threatening the things it outspeeds, like Machamp and Nidoking. Don't stay in on them one-on-one, but they won't want to switch into you. So, you also, you have to similarly watch out against Gar because you're frail, but you hit it really hard with Crunch. Misdreavus gets completely dominated. It can't do anything. And you're not going to really be messing with Starmie with it. But, if it's weakened, let's say. So you're generally going to want Crunch because, and that does a lot. Of course, Surf also does a ton, but you can potentially maneuver your way in on it. But that's not really important. So the thing about Hound Doom is that, of course, how do you pursue these targets? Oh, it's also a perfect Exeggutor thing. Switch in. Exeggutor, Jinx, those are its primary targets. And then, of course, the bonuses of, especially Misdreavus and Gengar on occasion. So the thing is, what if, Exeggutor and Jinx just sleep it? Well, a couple options. First, you can run lefties with Sleep Talk, which means you're not going to be pursuing them, but you will continuously switch into them and then fire off these strong attacks on the opponent. You really chunk things like the Electrics and Snorlax with Spikes down, Raikou with Spikes down, of course. And so you can do this and have a more longevity-focused Hound Doom throughout the game, or you can run Miracle Berry and dodge the status once and then try to pursuit them down. And you can run. You can even run a Miracle Berry, Sleep Talk if you really want to ensure you're locking them down, or you can run Thief to really accomplish something after you've burned the Miracle Berry. Stealing Snorlax's lefties is awesome if you can pull that off. So generally going to be looking something like this. And Hound Doom has some other options like Sunny Beam, Sunny Day Solar Beam, and Roar and Counter, but generally you're trying to pursue its targets, and you need some sort of anti-sleep measure for it to really pull that off reliably. Now, Hound Doom is kind of hard to fit on a wide variety of teams, but it is a really nice Pokemon. So, underrated, give it a shot. Now, I'm going to take one of my trademark bathroom breaks before we move on to Gen 3. Alright, now that I've unloaded the agency submachine gun, let's get into Gen 3 Pursuit. So, a couple notes about alternative pursuiters. So, Hound Doom, first of all, Miracle Berry is Gen 2's version of Lumberry. So, he doesn't use that anymore. But it also... Well, you would also probably use different moves like Hidden Power Grass. You don't need Crunch as much. HP Grass, Will-O-Wisp. This is generally the most reliable Hound Doom, with the ability, probably Flash Fire to absorb Moltres. Although Early Bird is typically, reliable to answer stupid Hypnosis Gengar. So now you gotta throw in EVs. Oh, what a pain. And you can run in all sorts of items, but yeah, and EV spread generally, outspeed Heracross. You can feasibly go slower for sure for more bulk, but invest in special defense. And yeah, so this is very hard to fit because the main pursuit user in the tier in Gen 3 is of course Tyranitar, and now that abilities are around, Sandstream takes over the metagame, and thus most of the time you're gonna want... The reason you use a non-T-Tar pursuiter is usually going to be I'm running a weather clearing team that needs to pursue without kicking up sand, so stuff like Rest Suicune, Rest Curselax. So I generally don't think those teams are very reliable, but that's one reason. And the second reason is you want to run a non-pursuit option on T-Tar, because Pursuit Tar is great, but it can be a little offensively lacking in its own right, as opposed to something like Choice Band, Dragon Dance, or Mixed. So that's one reason. But other than that, it's really hard to fit these guys in because they have less pronounced defensive utility. So that's Hound Doom for you. Now Umbreon is interesting because it has... The thing is, it's so offensively weak. I mean, like, this is the freest setup ever for every Calm Minder and Dragon Dance. I mean, if the opposing Pokemon does not instantly crumple the Toxic, i.e. a Steel type or anything with Substitute or even Lumberry, then it's lights out. But Umbreon does have some really great defensive use because for something it has Synchronize first of all as its ability. So the biggest Pokemon to be pursuited in Gen 3 is Gengar, and Gengar likes to spam Will-O-Wisp. Now, Will-O-Wisp is not going to cut the power of Pursuit because, as we know, it's still a special attack. But we also... the burn can still be irritating, passive damage and whatnot, especially when the Gengar escapes, because a lot of Gengars run special defense just to survive T-Tar Pursuit on the switch plus Sand, and then T-Tar gets removed by Dugtrio, and then the Gengar is still around. But with Synchronize, then you manage to burn the Gengar in return once it spams Will-O-Wisp, really turning it on itself. So that way the Gengar is permanently crippled and basically as good as dead. A burned Gengar is a worthless Gengar. It's basically death fodder. So, yeah, special defense, you can ward off things like Zapdos. Umbreon has a lot of flaws as a wall, so you really need to complement it with other special walls, which really limits the amount of teams it can feasibly fit in on. Or, complement it with walls, or just, go all out with offense. But it's hard to build a team with Umbreon, but it does fulfill a very specific niche. And finally, there's also Metagross. Now, Metagross does not have Stab on Pursuit, but and nor does it have like an astronomical special attack stat. However, it forces a lot of switches, and it switches in on a lot, so it has a lot of opportunities. And sometimes you're going to get walled by stuff, and you want to explode on that, and that's fine. But generally, then you just leave your mark on that Pokemon you explode on, and by pursuing something before you explode on something else, this is a very unique combination, pursuit and explosion, then you manage to leave chip in several places. And I'll give you an example. Let's assume you're facing a choice bander like opposing Metagross, or let's say Salamence, and your aim is to explode on the Water or Zapdos. So let's say you switch your Metagross in on the opposing Metagross's Meteor Mash, and they're going to switch, and they're going to switch to their Water or Zapdos that you're going to boom on after. And so you pursue their Choice Band Metagross. This is a great feeling, by the way. I love this one. You pursue their Choice Band Metagross, and you think, oh, that's not that much, but now that Metagross can suddenly no longer withstand, let's say, a Mixment's Fire Blast, or a DD-Tar Earthquake, or a number of other important attacks. +1 Jirachi Fire Punch. So, let me calc this. Yeah, so a little bit of Pursuit chip goes a long way, and Ostamentidos is excellent at using this. I mean, look, 25 to 30-ish on a CB Gross, and usually more because they usually run. Yeah, I mean, this is great damage. I would absolutely take this. That is supremely relevant chip damage. So, you can run HP Fire for Scarm, and if you've got a Magneton, then you can run HP Grass, which is a lot of fun. And you can run Modest, but I generally still like Power on the Explosion, but it's really up to you. So, anyway, so Pursuit Gross is really fun. Also a good Gengar trapper because you have Stab Psychic for it. I mean, you're not going to be killing the Gengar, but you definitely chunk it, and there's surprise factor to it as well. So Lum and Lefties are both good. So Pursuit Gross has surprise factor, and I mean, at the end of the day, it's still a Metagross. Even if Metagross just had no EVs and had Explosion, it would still be good. So, everything else is icing on the cake, and it shows it's the rare occasion of a non-stab Pursuit user really being effective. So, Gengar Trap, Banned Ments, and CB Gross Trap. I mean, nothing else pursues CB Gross. That is, maybe Hound Doom if you double it in, but you don't want to switch into Meteor Mash, so holds a very unique place in that regard. Doesn't really trap much else, but it's little bits of chip. I mean, if you have HP Fire, you can even scare out Fortress, stuff like that. You can even, let's say, HP Fire a Scarm, and then they're going to switch out, so you pursue and really make sure it has no legs to stand on when it comes back in, and thereby ensuring that your Snorlax or whatever is not going to get walled by it. I know we're talking about little incremental bits of chip, but it really makes such a difference. Now, finally, of course, there's Tyranitar. So, funnily enough, I can run this exact same set from GSC, but it has a ton of options. Generally, max special attack, you gotta want that, and then max HP as well. Live Gengar, Live +1 Mence, Dugtrio, all that good stuff. Now, T-Tar has basically a gajillion options here, and if you want to look into those options more, then I recommend watching my T-Tar in Advanced video, which is... What ability does T-Tar have? Oh, right. Anyway, because, then you have your... we're not really talking about the options that these Pursue Pokemon have, insofar as T-Tar can run Ice Beam and Counter and Protect. I do like Protect on Pursuitar. And HP Grass. So I'll just talk about some other applications of Pursuit. So Gengar is the main one, of course. And like Metagross, T-Tar can also switch in on the stab HP flying of CB Salamence and things like Double Edge from Band Aerodactyl, and it can Pursuit them for a really nice chunk. So, the Band Mence one is particularly nice because it's an impossible Pokemon to wall long term, so being able to kind of flip the script on it is really valuable for teams that would not be able to withstand its assault over the course of an extended game. So, it's really nice there. And I mean, you have so many different options. Like, let's say you have a one-on-one against a Snorlax that doesn't really want to stay in on you, and you just, rather than blindly guessing, okay, well, I think that the Swampert is going to come in, but it also might be Metagross, so let me choose between HP Grass and Fire Blast. Instead, you just Pursue, and you're like, well, now no matter what comes in, I will have chunked the Snorlax for a relevant amount. And we all know how little survivability Snorlax has in Sandstorm, so every little bit of chip there counts, especially with a Spike Up. This T-Tar is great for Spikes teams, really, patching up an otherwise incorrigible weakness to Gengar. That's a big one. So, because it doesn't mind burn. I mean, I used to like Pursuit Tar sets with Rock Slide and EQ in the events it doesn't eat burn, but I've weaned off those over time. So, yeah, I mean, you have the potential Starmie Trap, but you still got to be careful around that. And Gengar is your biggest one, and then various stuff. The Mence and Arrow ones are its most prominent targets. Otherwise, Celebi sometimes. You have the Snorlax one, of course. You can do something similar with Regice. If you go Crunch Drop fishing against something like a Porygon 2, you can potentially trap that. Something like Milotic. I mean, the 20% Crunch Drop really makes Pursuit even more nasty here. More so than in GSC, because, well, I mean, in GSC you can also feasibly do so, but here the chip damage is more pronounced with the multi-layered spikes and the Sandstream, so the Pursuit chip really, really sticks here. So you can do that. And then, like, if your opponent is fearing, they have a slow Metagross that doesn't want to eat a Fire Blast because otherwise they'll lose to your Arrow, or even better, this one's more feasible because Swampert is slower. So they have a bulky Swampert and they don't want to eat your HP Grass, then you can Pursuit that. Pursuing Swampert is a lot of fun. That one's big. So yeah, you have all sorts of applications here. I mean, you could think of a million things, like CB Flygon locked in a Rock Slide, time to Pursuit it. So, potentially Claydol, that's not easy because it has a strong stab EQ, but you can do stuff like chip it first with something else, you can run counter, etc. So, oh, whoops, I didn't mean to put Skarmory here. Skarmory does use Pursuit, but only in Ubers for Deoxys attack. That's a fun thing to do. But we're talking strictly OU here. So the last thing I will mention about Pursuit Tar in advance is that Lefties is the default item because it gives you extended defensive utility throughout the game, etc., switching into CB Mence, HP Flying, and whatnot. But you sometimes will want to run Black Glasses. This is something... now, don't get fooled by Showdown. In Gens 2 and 3... then Black Glasses and the other type boosting items are only a 10% boost, not a 20% boost. But it's still significant, because remember earlier I mentioned the special defense of Gengar that survives Pursuit Tar, Crunch, or Pursuit on the Switch plus Sand, and this doesn't guarantee it at all, but it certainly improves your odds significantly, and it just makes those chip hits on Swampert and Mence and everything else so much nastier. So... you got to be more careful with it because you can't throw it into hits and passively heal them off with lefties, but it's still very nice. So yeah, that's Gen 3 for you. Your partners are things like Fortress that can Rapid Spin. In general, it patches up a Gengar weakness that a lot of teams would have otherwise. Rather than having to dedicate a slot to a Gengar counter like Blissey or Special Offensive Celebi, then you can just change your T-Tar to Pursuit and be able to run all the offense you like. So... it's great support for anything that doesn't like Gengar, things like Flygon. Pairs really well with Magneton, so, against teams with Skarm and Gengar, then you have Pursuits for two of their biggest tools. So, it fits on all kinds of teams, and, yeah, just a tremendous Pokemon to have overall. So, there's that. Now let's move on to Gen 4. So Gen 4, Pursuit becomes physical. So T-Tar loves this, of course, because it has a higher attack stat, and it can also, I mean, even if Pursuit was special in this gen, it could boost it with choice specs, but it still wouldn't be as strong as boosting it with Choice Band because of that huge attack stat. So in terms of OU pursuiting, Umbreon goes away, Hound Doom goes away, Metagross goes away, and the only other pursuiter, I mean, during the main gen, then Scizor was very common with its Choice Band set and, you know, occasional Choice Scarfer. But CB was the primary one. And over time, its pursuit just, I mean, Scizor's main pursuit target was Latias, and once that was banned, then, because there's a new target here in the Rotom appliances, and Scizor is not a good, Rotom answer at all. I mean, the most you might do is switch into a Scarf Shadow Ball and pursue it, and that's nice, but nothing that you can rely on as you can T-Tar because of, you know, T-Tar's hugely powerful stab, you know, higher attack and stab on it. So, you know, even if it gets burned, then you're still dishing out tons of damage. Ideally, you don't get burned, but it was definitely doable, especially because it can outspeed Restock Rotom without a huge blow, without a huge difference in the way it takes those attacks it's supposed to withstand, like from Scarf Rotom. Whereas as soon as you start pumping speed on, you know, you can't switch into a Thunderbolt with Scizor from Rotom like you can with T-Tar. So now Scizor is also good against Gengar with Pursuit, but generally Scarf is safer for this purpose because it also lets you do things like U-turn on Starmie more reliably and not have to be in pristine shape for something like a Latias. So Scarf Scizor is still pretty fun. Now, Scizor is also used to be a lot more prominent. You know, things like Gengar used to run Protect HP Fire. So if Scizor would Bullet Punch, then it would switch out to Magnezone, and if it would stay in, it would just get HP fired into Oblivion when it was running Choice Band all the time. So, and Latias would, you know, try similar things. But you know, though the times of Scizor being a prime pursuiter are, you know, more or less gone. I mean, there's also Weavile technically, but Weavile is not a good trapper. You know, it had a very, very slight moment of, yeah, this might be pretty underrated, but it's so frail. Its Night Slash is just not as threatening as it needs to be, and it has such a tough time getting in with the Rocks weakness and Sand weakness and, you know, immense frailty and lack of resists. I mean, the Psychic immunity doesn't really help it at all, and the Ghost resist just isn't enough. I mean, maybe technically, you know, for the sake of covering everything, then yeah, but you don't want to run Choice Band on it. You know, you got to run Life Orb or like Black Glasses or Expert Belt, and that hurts it even more, and it can't fit all the moves it wants to. So, you know, you want Night Slash to force the issue, and you want Pursuit, and then what? You don't have Ice Punch or you don't have Brick Break, and, you know, even if you have all the moves you want, then it's still not great. But, you know, we're including it because we want to mention everything. And then, you know, beyond that, then you have like gimmicky UU trappers like, well, Snorlax technically also has Pursuit, but it can't use Pursuit and Self-Destruct, and Self-Destruct is the only reason you would use Snorlax over T-Tar, so. And then there's like other UU trap stuff, like Drapion is fun, Skuntank has some fun application, but, you know, it's generally going to be restricted to T-Tar 9 times out of 10. You know, 8.5 if we're being both movie buffs and if we're being generous, let's say. So the reason T-Tar is so good is that it with its special defense boost in Sand, which it now has that it didn't have in Gen 3, then it's able to trap Starmie reliably, especially because it's so much stronger now that its Pursuit is operating off its physical attack. Trap Starmie, trap the Rotom forms, trap Latias, and you know, Celebi's not really common anymore, but those are the big targets. With a Scarf set, you know, it can also run Scarfs because even with a without the boost from an Adamant Nature and a Choice Band, that it still hits really hard. Against the targets, it needs to hit hard, and the extra speed is nice because, like I said, with Scizor, then, you know, Scizor sometimes needs to be in pristine shape to handle something like a Latias or a Gengar, and with Scarf you remove that, and it's the same principle with T-Tar. Especially against like something like Starmie as well, and it gives it more applications in general. But the nice thing about T-Tar, in addition to trapping your Latias, your Starmie, your Rotom, your Gengar, it also can, with Scarf, you can pull off that kind of Pursuit everything thing. Here's the example of mixed Dragonite. So, or any kind of Dragonite. You know, one-on-one, you're not going to want to stay in on T-Tar, which can just Scarf Stone Edge you to Oblivion, and then you chunk it with Pursuit for a nice amount of damage. And, you know, that'll really help, especially with rocks. You really limit the amount of damage that D-Knight will be able to do to you later. You can, as you can see here, Crunch does a, you know, pretty meaty... Oh, that's Hasty Dragonite. I think they should be Rash. But, so, you know, even if we change to Rash, that's still a very meaty chunk. So... you can do that. You can do something similar with Gyarados if it hasn't intimidated you. You can do something similar with nearly everything. Roserade, that's a big one. The biggest one, arguably, is Zapdos. Zapdos is a huge, huge pain. So being able to chunk it and force it to roost later, it gives you a lot of leeway in playing around it. So that one's really nice. I mean, with Scarf generally goes back and forth between EQ and Superpower, but in a one-on-one, Infernape's not going to risk it. And Infernape is a huge threat to a lot of teams, so you can even feasibly do stuff like, we're talking about unconventional pursuiting. Infernape would be a prime target for that. Now, those are offensive targets, for the most part. That yeah, defensive Latias and Rotom, but, you're still are variants of those Pokemon that you want to trap. But it generally doesn't change. Like, whether you're running Scarf or Band doesn't make a huge difference. I mean, you have to be conscious of how you play with it, but it doesn't make a huge, huge difference in whether you are capable of trapping those Pokemon or not. Now, I say that to emphasize the difference between Band and Scarf and trapping, like, the real blobs. So, Blissey is the main one. Now, you can technically, still chunk Blissey, because it doesn't want to eat a Scarf superpower, especially with the Rock Sub, and then you can pursue it for a little. But the main one is Clefable. And Clefable... you can feasibly trap with a Choice Band Tar. I mean, if it's got Protect, then, good night. But the thing is that we'll get to the non-choice trap Tar in a second. But, assuming it's not Protect, which a good amount of them aren't, then you can get a huge chunk on Clefable. And Clef generally relies on being really healthy to withstand the hits it withstands. Like, even something as innocuous as a Heatran Lava Plume. So suddenly, it's in not such a great place to take those. So CB-Tar is a great method of generating offense. Now, of course, you might think, well, all this, you mentioned earlier, the Protect Gengar to guard against Scizor, all these choice pursuits, they have to be choiced. Can that be exploited? Yeah, they definitely can. So that's why something like the mixed Tar, generally the de facto standard Tar, all-out support Tar that's on the decks, then, let me find it here. Yeah, all-purpose is what it's called. So you can fit Pursuit and Stone Edge. But basically, it gives you the freedom to alternate between Crunch and Pursuit as you see fit. You don't Pursuit Starmie as it, stays in and suddenly lose. And then the other moves are really team-dependent. You can run Stone Edge to really stick the issue to Zapdos, or Superpower, Stealth Rock, Fire Blast for Breloom and Skarm. A lot of stuff. But the whole point being that being able to switch moves is really nice. Because, I mean, it's still T-Tar, still hitting really hard. You can increase your opportunities with things like Pasho Berry for Starmie and Specs Latias. Chople Berry for Gengar. Being able to trap Gengar without relying on Scarf. And, have all the restrictions that come with the Choice Lock. Instead of being able to free to Fire Blast T-Tar, or Skarm, keep it out of your face alongside Breloom and such. Chople is good. Lumberry to give you an edge on Rotom, which is really nice. And something like shrugging off a Clefable T-Wave if it's running that. Lum is really nice for that. And I've always... You can run Expert Belt too if you like. Yeah, Lum is also nice for things like a T-Wave or Toxic Reflect Latias, so you can stay and just bash it over and over. So that's a really good one. You can run Expert Belt, which is also nice, increase those super effective hits against those bulky Rotoms, those bulky Starmies. And, now you really threaten Clefable with superpower, so Expert Belt is a great choice. I mean, T-Tar has a million options. Leftovers for survivability? Yeah, you can absolutely do that. And you don't need max attack. I mean, if you're going to be pursuing with such a T-Tar, you want some investment, but again, hit the calc. I like max attack, but it depends on what you need to switch into. If you needed to switch into Latias and Zapdos and Heatran, then, give it a lot of bulk. And, if you're not fitting Fire Blast, then you generally don't need speed. So I would just recommend, attack and bulk. But if you are running Fire Blast, then I would recommend, some speed to outrun Skarms and Looms. Anyway, so Yeah. Oh, the last item I wanted to mention was black glasses again. Now it's a 20% boost, and this means your crunches are hitting things really hard. I mean, even chunking things like offensive Swampert nicely. And this means that your neutral target pursuits, so specifically your Clefables and your Zapdoses, it now means that those are really, really stinging. So while still giving you the freedom to switch moves. So, those are your options, more or less, for T-Tar, and that's what it traps. Let's move on to Gen 5. So, Scizor, so Weavile's out of the picture, and the only other Pursuiter is nothing, because they're not good, sadly. You know, there's Fringe, technically Bisharp could be viable, and come on, you're not fitting that on the team. What is this? Oh, okay. Anyway, so Scizor with a Scarf or Band Set is still, decent, and it's got new targets. Like, Scarf especially can trap Alakazam, which is a major threat. So, I'll definitely mention it for that. Band Pursuit is one of the safer options for Reuniclus because it's not weak to Focus Blast, unlike T-Tar. Now, T-Tar's pursuing in Gen 5 is more takes a back seat. Instead of like offensively pursuing, it used to be when Gen 5 was the main gen, that it was like, alright, I'm going to aggressively Choice Band, Pursuit this Politoed and this Tentacruel and this Jellicent, and my pokes are going to go wild because of it. And now it's more like out of defensive necessity because otherwise its team will fall apart against Latios. So it's a lot less about the offensive pressure and more about being alive to make sure that Latios doesn't kill more than one thing. So if even getting a kill, if you've managed to keep the field clear of hazards and you're at full health and you're sufficiently invested. I mean, it's hard. It takes a ton, and a lot of people go careful just for the safety. So yeah. You can also go Pursuit Zam, force it down to the sash at least, which is nice. I actually really like Thunder Wave on Pursuit Tar because Zam will never switch out because it can't. That would be a horrible move. So you T-Wave it and then bring it down to the sash, and then it's really ruined. But I recognize that it's hard to fit, so. Anyway, you also can engage in a Crunch Pursuit game against Reuniclus. I mean, that one's a lot more annoying, but yeah. The Choppleberry and necessitation of special defense EVs really brings down T-Tar as an offensive pursuiter because otherwise, if you didn't have to run Chopple to not fall apart against Thundurus and Zam and Reuniclus and Tornadus, and then it would be a lot better. That's why whenever I can make a team that doesn't need Chopple T-Tar, I revel in it. And I don't, put on Lumberry or something. No, I gotta give it that Dark Gem or that Choice Band, so you actually get an opportunity. Like Gastrodon is a great partner for enabling such an idea, because you are able to, check those Pokemon nicely, reliably, especially with Spin Sport from Excadrill. And yeah, you then are able to reap the full benefits of really pressuring Politoed. I mean, what is better to win a Weather War than forcing that damage on the opposing range setter? You being able to do something similar is really nice against Tentacruel and Jellicent, big parts of the hazard game. And what's really noticeable actually, the lack of offensively inclined Tyranitar. Thanks to the necessitation of these defensive sets with little attack investment, then that has made it easier for Pokemon like the Slow Twins and Jellicent to get away with not getting trapped by T-Tar, whereas previously Pokemon like that would be going, and even Amoonguss was like, oh well, I gotta watch out for the Choice Band T-Tar. I mean, Choice Band T-Tar was capable of trapping Amoonguss, and then Keldeo, the famed combo of Pursuit plus Keldeo is still on paper uncounterable. Even Amoonguss had to fear getting pursued with rocks and sand, because then it wouldn't be able to switch into Keldeo anymore. But with how necessary Choppletar has become, then it's those Pokemon get away a lot more scot-free, and that's why I personally still like a lot of attack on my Choppletar. I think it gives it some more opportunity, but it doesn't tend to make a humongous difference. It's more minute, but something to consider for sure. What was that other point I wanted to make? Yeah, one of the reasons Rain struggles with Latios so much is because it can't fit Pursuit on. Like, it can sometimes fit Band and Band or Scarf Scizor on, but I mean, that's rare, and that's one of the reasons why Latios is such a threat to Rain. And, yeah. Oh, Scarftar is also good, but, doesn't possess the... I think it's... if you're running Gastrodon, then you don't really need that extra support from Scarf, so... yeah, what I wanted to say is don't run Stealth Rock on your Pursuit Tar unless you have another Stealth Rocker. Because if you need T-Tar to check those threats and Pursuit them and also Stealth Rock, you're just not going to be able to do it. And a lot of teams don't give T-Tar any room to safely Stealth Rock. So... if you have a second Stealth Rocker and you have T-Tar in and you have a very free turn to set the rocks up, then sure, great, do that. But if you don't have another Stealth Rocker, well then get one, because it cannot be your only rocker. Otherwise you are just going to get overwhelmed by those Pokemon insanely easily. It's not like it's hard to find other Stealth Rockers on Sand. There are like a million that fit on every team. So anyway, my point being that, well, I've made all those points now, so I think that is mostly covering all its targets. I mean, Gengar is basically gone, and we've mentioned the things it supports. I mean, Keldeo is still the big one. Yeah, if you can fit a more aggressive T-Tar alongside Keldeo, Keld plus Pursuit is still a devastating combination. So, yes, that is more or less it for Black and White. Yeah, I mean, it really becomes the T-Tar show from Gens 3 to 5. With, occasional appearances from other guests, but it's mostly Tar in the permanent Sand metagames. So, yeah, that's the Keldeo checks are still all more or less destroyed by T-Tar. It's just, you gotta watch out for other things, like Keldeo getting worn down by Sand, which is why Keldeo should run lefties, picking the right Keldeo coverage, and not getting ripped apart by spikes. So those are things to consider, but on paper, Tar-Keld is as dangerous as ever, and in practice too. So that's Gen 5 for you. If you can pursue it, this is why defensive Politoed sucks, by the way. Or sorry, no, Scarf Politoed sucks. Defensive is good because Scarf just gets completely destroyed by Pursuit Tar. No lefties, no bulk, and defensive Politoed can stay in and slug it out or withstand a crunch or a Pursuit on the switch. So. Anyway, yeah, you're not going to be pursuing much. Yeah, you don't really have the Rogue Pursuit option with T-Tar here. I mean, Politoed and Tentacruel is as unconventional as you're going to get with most of your stuff. And the others, you're mostly just hitting your targets, your Latios and your Latios, your Psychic types, basically. Your Psychic types and your occasional Jellicent. So now we move on to Gen 6, and we're actually going to call it there, because I don't have enough experience in Gen 7 with the alternative Pursuiters to really speak on it, because of, I'm familiar with like Crocodile and T-Tar still good, etc., but we're going to stick to the Gen 6 ones for the most part. I don't know why I clicked on Ferrothorn. Okay, so the thing with Scizor is that Scizor now gets a Mega. Now, Scizor doesn't really I mean, it can run Pursuit, but again, that's more of a set that became popular in Gen 7. Pursuing things like Mega Zam. It's still feasible in Oris, but, harder to fit on teams. So, you can run Pursuit on Mega Scizor. Generally, you won't. The primary Pursuiters in Gen 6 are... well, at the beginning of the gen, it used to be Bisharp. It used to run Assault Vest sets, and I still think there is some promise for that set. Just because it has great defensive typing and, Defiant for Defog, plus, Knockoff. So I think there's definitely potential for it, but especially because it has, unlike T-Tar, it has priority. So, but the main Pursuiters is, well, once again, Tyranitar. No longer has permanent Sand, but still a very good Pursuiter. Scarf sets are good. Choice Band sets used to be great, as that replay with Blunder at the beginning of the video displayed, but I think the metagame's gotten faster, and as Mega Metagross became more prominent, then Scarftar became more prominent as well. So, because, I mean, it has to watch out for Bullet Punch at low health, or lower health, but you really need that option for getting rid of Gross. It's so dangerous. You got to keep up with the offensive end of the metagame, and even being able to outspeed things like Keldeo and Zard Y is just really, really useful. Manaphy, getting the jump on as many offensive threats as possible is great. So if someone wants to mention, an underrated use for Pursuit Scizor, for example, then, please be my guest. But I'm more of a Bisharp guy personally. But yeah, Scizor has some great traits. The Roosts, Knockoff, U-Turn, Priority, and Bullet Punch. Defensive utility. But I generally find myself more interested in Bisharp. Now, the second option is Weavile. Weavile also outspeeds Metagross, but that's not really its primary target. Now, Weavile is interesting because, well, first of all, let's throw the Scarf set on this T-Tar. Oh, no, I generally prefer Earthquake because of Mega Diancie, but also Rock Slide because you don't really need Stone Edge. And you can run some bulk on it for things like Volcarona, but that's more optional. Superpower is also good. No, Superpower is probably better because it checks Bisharp better. I mean, EQ still hits Bisharp really hard, so up to you. Depends on your team and your preference. Superpower is probably the safer option, though. Not being walled by Ferrothorn is nice. Anyway, the biggest thing to pursue in Gen 6, of course, is that it is no longer resisted by Steel. So you can do things like Trap Heatran, as mentioned earlier. Here's another reason for Superpower. Extra damage against Excadrill, and the Swiss Army Knife utility Excadrill that's really popular will not want to stand and take a Superpower, so you can chunk it with Pursuit, and that makes it easier to wear down and easier to maintain your hazards, which are otherwise going to be repeatedly cleared by Exca, things like that. Really, really nice. And of course, the Steel nerf is what makes Mega Metagross weak to Crunch in the first place, as opposed to being neutral. So, and another really big one that not Skarmory, not Scizor. What is it that I'm forgetting about? Oh, Magnezone, that's the one. Yeah. So, let's say you're thinking, oh man, this Magnezone is gonna be a pain for my Skarm or my Pharaoh or my Mega Scizor. Then you can go to your Scarftar, and it's not gonna want to stay in and eat Superpower EQ, so you can pursue it as it switches out. And I'm not saying that you're going to be reliably KO Magnezone this way, but the little bit of chip might make a big difference, especially because it often tries to come in on stuff like Mega Metagross too. So by limiting that, then you open up a lot of options. So basically, this is where Pursuit has more and more options. I mean, chipping every little thing. So, I mean, like I said earlier, I've seen Scarftars chase out and trap Mega Heracrosses after a close combat drop because they didn't want to take the Stone Edge. So, really applicable to everything. And speaking of, here's Weavile. Yeah, this is ABR's creation, and it's a great pursuiter. I mean, the thing about Weavile is, unlike Tyranitar, it does not have defensive utility. So, the main thing that T-Tar does is switch really easily into the Lati twins. Now, Weavile doesn't switch into Latios at all, and it can switch into Latios, but it also has a tougher time threatening it out with its Dark Stab, because that's used Ice Stab instead, which is fine. But relying on Knockoff as Dark Stab could definitely be tricky against things like Mega Slowbro, that's the big one. And, because, otherwise you might just get walled. And, yeah, itemless pokes in general. But, Weavile, the main thing, that knockoff thing is almost an addendum. I mean, it's irritating, but not the end of the world, because you should be aware of it. The more irritating thing is, A, Stealth Rock weak, B, frail. However, what Weavile does is provide a ton of speed. And what Weavile does is, I mean, T-Tar does this too, and a major target I missed with T-Tar is trap Tornadus Therian, because it's really hard to fit Superpower on Torn. You want a U-turn, knock off Hurricane, and then like Heat Wave or HP Ice, and I mean, it's tough to fit other options in there. So you can do that. And Band T-Tar is especially good at that, but even Scarftar can do it, because it's generally fairly easy to keep up rocks if you really put your mind to it. So, Torn will just get trapped. And Weavile does this, but more aggressively. Now, I haven't seen less Band Weavile recently, because, it's hard to fit, but it's still a monster of a Pokemon. And, you outrun and smack Torn. And Weavile and Torn together are actually the reasons why Life Orb Zam fell off. Life Orb Zam is actually stronger than Mega Zam, and doesn't take up a Mega slot, but those two guys really cramp its style. But yeah, so you have Weavile's immense speed, which is really, really useful. And it's also, unlike Scarftar, I mean, T-Tar has to choose between being an offensive threat with a band set that can also trap and is more effective against things like Slowbro. And you also, but then it can't outspeed all the things that it wants to check offensively. So it's a tough call. And Ban T-Tar can do great things like check Gliscor with Ice Punch, or like whereas Scarf gets switched in on and stalled out all day. But yeah, you have that problem. But Weavile actually traps Gliscor a lot more effectively. I mean, I say traps with quotation marks. I mean more in the sense that you really, really chunk it and make it harder for it to come back in, especially with Rocks Up. But yeah, I think Weavile with some Excadrill support is really, it's almost underrated. You have the speed, but you also have the huge power of Choice Band with Weavile. I mean, you're still faster than Scarftar, so like if it comes down to it, you're still checking Tornadus even at 1 HP, whereas T-Tar at 1 HP just gets KO'd. So that's a major difference as well. And, oh yeah, Weavile also can feasibly trap Scarflando because it doesn't want to eat Ice Shard, so you just Pursuit it. That's pretty nasty. You have the problem of not being so good against Colbur Jellicent, because it withstands the knockoff, and then, even if it's lost, well, I mean, Scarftar has that problem too. And most Jellicent right now are protect with lefties, but that can be taken advantage of with something like Clefable, since it means it won't have Taunt, and any Choice Pursuit. And with the Dark types here, then you are going to have to rely on Choice Pursuit. Some people like support T-Tar, but that's really niche in comparison to Band. I mean, it's probably easier to slap on teams than Band right now, because it also offers Stealth Rock support, but I wouldn't call it the most reliable pursuiter. I suppose it's probably just unexplored, honestly, the more I think about it. So you can consider support Tar as well, but be careful of Excadrill, but you gotta watch out for that anyway. So the biggest thing with support Tar is that you're not going to be good against Metagross, and even be able to outrun things like Keldeo and Serperior, another major threat. So you are going to be more restricted to the bulky Pokemon you're targeting. Your Slowbro, your Bulky Starmie's kind of rare. Your Slowbro, your Jellicent, your occasional Heatran, I suppose. But it's potentially really nice. I have used a couple teams with it, and it can be nice. One nice application about Ban T-Tar, actually, is, this is kind of forgotten because Weavile isn't as popular as it was, but if Weavile locks into Pursuit, then you can trap it back with T-Tar. I mean, that's some unconventional pursuiting for you. So let's examine the Ban T-Tar. So let's say Weavile traps your Latios. And yeah, Crunch does a ton to Weavile. I mean, especially with its rocks. I mean, even if you switch into a knockoff, then that's fine, because even though you don't want to have the ban, you're still going to be doing a ton. So, with the rocks weakness, then you really cripple Weavile in return. So you ensure that, yeah, it might have trapped something of yours, but you are getting it back in return, evening up the score, or coming very close to it, especially because it's not easy to guarantee that you keep rocks off. So Weavile very often is going to start out at 75%. So, just like Torn. So now the final Pursuiter really is not a Dark type. Once again, it's Metagross, and this time its Pursuit has a free Life Orb boost thanks to Tough Claws. So it's not pursuing like the defensive Pokemon. It's not pursuing your Slowbro, your Jellicent, your maybe your Mega Latios. It is pursuing your Latios for sure, but Latios is really, I wouldn't say hasn't fallen out of the metagame, but it definitely isn't as slappable as it once was, as its weaknesses just become so prominent. But yeah, Pursuit, now this is a Pokemon, I mean, if you've watched CBB play in the last couple of years, he loves pursuing everything with this Pokemon. Actually, he drops Meteor Mash on it a lot. But, I mean, little incremental bits of chip. I mean, Metagross scares out a lot, and of course has its, it's semi-hard to hard walls, like Slowbro and Tangrowth. So instead of just attacking into them, then you just guarantee some chip somewhere else. It's a good chip. It's a good way of chipping Tornadus Therian. Again, I mean, you got to watch out for Heat Wave. You got to be at good health. But the nice thing about Metagross is that you also have priorities. So, you can, if Torn T lives the Pursuit, you can potentially Bullet Punch to finish it off. Or you can Pursue as it switches out to try and avoid that Bullet Punch. Things of that nature. A lot of options. You can do a Stealth Rock Pursuit set if you really want. Mega Metagross can really do anything it wants, but the main thing is that it's like a combination. It's weird because it's an offensive threat. Like it's got the speed. It got really good speed. It outruns Keldeo, which is huge, and it as long as you have a move to hit Keldeo, like I think this set was popular for a time, especially if you have Magnezone support for Ferrothorn, and you gotta watch out for Gliscor too, but. That's doable with other pokes. Anyway, so something like this is really popular. I mean, you can trap Zard Wise, and I mean, not for KO ranges, but little incremental bit of chip, especially with Rocks Up, makes a huge difference and makes Metagross an even more multifaceted threat, because it's not enough that it already outruns and destroys everything. And I mean, if your opponent has nothing to really switch into it, then you should just be outright attacking. But here, that's the beauty of Mega Metagross. You don't really have to just use it as a trapper. It's just another feature it potentially adds. Like, being able to chip Keldeo is so nice. I mean, you pair this thing with a Bisharp or something, and, Keldeo with Rocks Up taking little bits of pursuit damage from Mega Metagross, and it will eventually... It has its opportunities limited by a lot. In what it can do, the amount of damage it can dish out, the amount of hits it can withstand. So I mean, like this 20% minimum, that's nice. In conjunction with the 6% from, I would take it. Keldeo does not heal, so Mega Diancie, that's another great one. You can do all sorts of stuff against that in irritating scenarios, because we know how irritating that Pokemon can be. With Earthquake, then you have the jump on non-EQ opposing Mega Metagross, which is really nice, and you can, and that's a lot of them, because a lot of them want Hammer Arm, because they don't like being walled by Ferrothorn, so this requires the extra Ferrothorn help, but that's not unreasonable at all, and in return you get an advantage in a really crucial one-on-one, and you get to punish opposing Mega Metagross, once again by pursuing them. I mean, Weavile also can trap non-BP Mega Metagross, but BP is so good on it that I don't see it being dropped almost ever. T-Tar can still withstand one from high health, but Weavile, just crumples. It's not a guaranteed OHKO, but it's like a very likely one. And with Mega Metagross, it's a lot less risky, because, they don't want to stay in on my EQ, and I just pursued them for a really, really nice chunk. Let's take a look at the damage. And, I mean, even if you don't have EQ, then I think, like, if they don't have a... Yeah, that's not so great, but in a one-on-one, you're going to get out-damaged by Hammer Arm. But if they can, it's still a very nice tool to have, especially if they're making themselves slower. And, you outdo Thunder Punch, so... But yeah, this Pursuit on Switch is really nasty, so... Lots of really, really great applications for it. I mean, and Clefable, that's another one. So, something really cool to do is... Okay, so first time you knock off the Clefable with Torn, because what else switches into Torn? What a menace. And then later, you do things like Volt Switch out with Rotom, or U-turn out with Torn, and then the Clefable lacking lefties, I mean, even if it's bold, then it's not going to enjoy this. I mean, that little bit of, that little 13%, realistically 14% minimum, then that's a lot of incremental chip damage, especially because Clefable, just like in DPP, then you really... You need to be healthy to withstand the things it switches into. So you with that little bit of U-turn, or even better with Volt Switch from Rotom, Rotom and Torn are great partners to Metagross, then you get these little bits of chip on it. And so I use this on a team with Specs Hydreigon, and my goal was basically spam Dark Pulse. So by being able to chip, I mean, I wasn't chipping Clefable just to chip Clefable, although that is always nice, but because, in conjunction with, Torn knocking it off and then U-turning and then Rotom Volt Switching, and Metagross pursuing, then suddenly Clefable, with all that little chip damage, I mean, 4% here, 14% there, and suddenly it would be so scared of Hydreigon's Specs Flash Cannon that it wouldn't be able to switch in at all, and, I would just be able to spam Dark Pulse. And I mean, this is just bold Clefable that takes that little from Pursuit. I mean, as soon as you go Calm and, start dropping the defense EVs down, then it goes a lot higher. So, yeah, it's really nice. Being able to pursue Clefable, even though it resists the move, is so, so nice. You can do similar things to like Excadrill and, Gliscor if they're fearing Ice Punch. So, Mega Metagross is a beautifully multifaceted pursuiter. That's why I saved it for last. It just does so much. It's a great Swiss Army knife. and has so many fantastic applications that just make it even more of a threat. Because most of the other time, like all the other Pursuiters we've seen up to this point have really just been like more team support Pursuiters. But with Mega Metagross, it's a threat in its own right, and it has Pursuit on top of it. I mean, it's most similar to Advanced Metagross in that sense. Not a dedicated Pursuit Trapper. I mean, yes, you do like pairing this with Keldeo, and you're like, well, okay, they have a Latios or Latios, so I'm just going to trap that with Metagross, and then goodbye. But it's just more of a way of threatening everything. So, yeah, and I think that's really where we're going to call it, because this has been going on for longer than I expected. So, you're not trapping things, like T-Tar and Weavile can trap things like Zapdos that Metagross can't realistically, but you also are much more of an offensive threat in return. So, and finally, I should mention Mega T-Tar, like the one used on CBB's team that I did a video on. Stealth Rock. I mentioned, so we have Scartar, Band Tar, then regular support, with Adamant, and then regular support Chople Tar for things like Thundurus and Mega Zam and whatnot. So you can run Stealth Rock and Bulk. I've seen like non-crunch variants of this, which is with a Fire Blast instead. That's also a good set. You can run something like Brave or Sassy or whatever you're feeling like. More bulk, it's totally fine. But the general premise is the same. So, and then of course we have the Mega T-Tar, which hits really hard. I mean, Mega T-Tar is basically the idealized version of that DPP, of the support sets from DPP in Black and White, because it has a Mega Boost, so it hits really hard, and it's bulky, and it's faster, so you just get the best of everything. So, awesome set, should be used a lot more. So yeah, T-Tar is the second Mega Pursuiter, and yeah, so we'll just max HP for simplicity's sake. Anyway, that's mostly it. I think that's everything I wanted to cover. So the two Mega Pursuiters and then Weavile in between. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was enjoyable for you. I know it went on for a while. I didn't expect that, but that's my deal. That's my thing. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoy exploring the many beautiful possibilities of Pursuit. We'll catch you later.